Well, I would just say, if you have a choice, don't do it. Picture this. Montana, 22-4. A cabin tucked deep in the valley. Theckened, you only find if you want to hide away. Wind cuts through the pine trees like a sharp knife. The sky outside is gray-like. Ash, low and heavy, like it knows something bad is coming and won't try to stop it. Inside, the fireplace glows softly, more hot coals than real flames. Kristofferson sits bent over in an old chair. His guitar leans against it, strings loose, old wood, stained from years of sweat and quiet. A bottle of whiskey sits on the table, already half gone. Next toit, a tape recorder, an old notepad with corners curled up like dried leaves, and a pen that's run out of forgiveness. His eyes are red and tired. His shawls shake. Not because he's old, but because he's shouldering back. From decades of keeping his mouth shut, fighting down names he should have said out loud. From smiling with gritted teeth while liars praised his songs and quietly stuck the knife in his back. He's dona-buying nice. I'd let a lot of jerks get away with. He says the words sharp and final, cowards wearing fancy clothes. Pots with ice-cold hearts. Fake people who sang me songs like they were just party tricks. He leans forward, presses the old play button with a crooked finger. Their quarter clicks, old but still working. Kris doesn't clear his throat, doesn't warm up, doesn't even blink. These, he say slow and flat, are the ones I never forgave. A pause. Then, as the wind howls just outside the cabin door, he starts, not with a song, but with a list. Willie Nelson, the smooth-talking snake. It started in '76 in a smoky back room in Austin. 2 names carved into outlaw country music. Brothers in song. At least that's how the posters made it look. But being brothers means you trust each other. Being loyal, having a line you don't cross. Willie crossed them all. First, he took Kris's road manager, said he just needed him for a week. 10th drummer, just for a few shows, Hesmald. Then, like it was nothing, Willie moved in on Kris' girlfriend, smiled the whole time like the devil dressed up for church. Every time it was the Samizi charm. It's all love, man. Kris, always. The tough poet bit his tongue when let it go. He'd lived through Vietnam, the music business, Hollywood. He knew how to lose without complaining. He told himself Willie was just being Willie. But under that long braid and pot-smoking act, there was something colder, something sneaky. Willie didn't ask, he just took. And the world, drunk on his outlaw grin and fake wise man act, just let him. One night, buzzed on whiskey and his own fame, Willie looked at Kris across a table and said, "You're still small time, man. Holly wouldn't count. Songs are what matter. Real loans, that one hit deep." Kris had written with his heart and soul. Sunday Morning Coming Down wasn't just a song. It was a soul torn apart. Every line a confession, every chorus a wound. And Willie took those wounds, dressed them up in pot smoke and laid back coolness, and sang them like he'd lived through them. The final straw came on the European tour of '79. Cold cities, bad food, long nights. Everyone was worn down. In Amsterdam, Kris stood behind the stage, guitar in hand, waiting to go on. Then Willie stepped up first. Smiling that same old preacher's grin, and without warning, started singing. "Help me make it through the night." No introduction, no permission, no credit. And then, like twisting a knife with a wink, he leaned into the microphone and said, "Something I wrote when I was in a dark place." The crowd cheered. Kris didn't move, didn't blink, just stood frozen while the truth walked out of his mouth in Summy Niels's voice. Backstage, there was no yelling, no fighting, just a silent sothic. It could choke you. Kris passed Willie in the hallway, looked him right in the eye, and said, "You're a thief in Denis. They didn't speak for 3 years, and in that silence, the stories kept coming. Willie telling reporters Kris was too sensitive for this business, smirking. Through radio interviews, saying he's still playing for claps. I'm playing for the truth. He even told a record company boss, Kris, he's a poet, sure, but poets don't fill stadiums. He'll always be small time. Kris heard tall. Nashville has no secrets, just delayed echoes. And while Willie kept floating higher, wrapped in smoke and sweet lies, Kris sat with the weight of a friendship that had never been mean, more than a deal. Willie is the outlaw everyone loved because he knew how to sell rebellion like it was religion, but Kris knew better. Willie wasn't an outlaw. He was a smooth-talking snake in a cowboy hat. And snakes don't ride for onion, but themselves. Vince Gill, country music's fake smile. Kris had always hated fake people. Could smell them before they opened their mouth. Something about the shine, the easiness, the way words came to clean. Shiny, fake, polished, pretty music stripped off soul and sold like perfume. And Vince Gill, Vince was the whole package. He was Nashville's golden boy, smile white as a church lie. Voice sanded down smoother than a lawyer's confession. Suits that looked like they cost more than Kris's first record deal. He hawed charm by the bucket, soul maybe by the drop. Cue Kris. Vince looked like someone who'd never missed a meal, never lost a fight that wasn't planned. Never sat on a motel bed at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering if the next verse was going to save him or kill him. At the 1995 Country Music Awards, Kris was asked to give an award. Some lifetime achievement thing, the kind of plastic show usually avoided like poison. But has it yes, out of duty, out of fistery, out of some beaten-down sense of tradition. He showed up in old leather boots and a worn-out jacket that still smelled like the 70s. He stood at their podium like a monument to a dying breed. The kind that didn't care about chart positions, photo opportunities, or kissing up talk roads that wouldn't know a real lyric if it bit them on the butt. Thenthi said Vince Gill's name. That crowd roared. Vince walked out looking like a toothpaste commercial wrapped in a tuxedo. Hair perfect, teeth shining, suit sharpened now to cut you. Kris held out a hand, more out of habit than invitation. Vince gave it a look, maybe a nod. Then he walked past like Kris was a coat rack someone had forgotten to remove from the stage. And then he started talking about real country artists, about honoring the roots, about carrying flame forward. He never said Christnum, not once, never looked back. Never gave a nod to the man who wrote the road map he was now riding down in a stretch limo. Backstage, some kid with a press pass and no memory of anything before Garth Brooks shoved a microphone in Kris's face. What do you think of Vince's sound? Kris didn't slow down. Sounds like beige, hest. No edge, no grit, just smooth for the sake of being smooth. Weeks later, word came down that a tribute album was being put together in honor of Kris Ang's. Vince Gill wanted to cover Help Me Make It Through the Night. The producers called, grinning, through the phone like they just got Elvis. Kris didn't think twice. No, he said, thin lot, low, hollow, bitter. That guy couldn't make it through one real emotion, let alone a whole night of them. The line went quiet. You let him sing sit song, Kris added, voice like sandpaper, and it dies in his mouth. Might as well get a store dummy to hum it. He hung up, then poured a drink and didn't say another word. Dolly Parton, plastic and perfect and poison. In 1982, someone at the TV network got a bright idea. Put Kris Kristofferson and Dolly Parton together for a joint appearance on Hee Haw. On paper, it was electric. Two legends, two styles, two coasts of the same broken country. But anyone who actually knew them, really knew them, would have called it what it was, a bad match dressed up as nostalgia bait. The dressing rooms were small that night, so they shared one. Dolly walked in first, a big air. Big smile, boots covered in sparkles like a Vegas sign. She looked like something built in a Nashville lab. Sparkle, sweetness, attitude, and absolutely no room for anything real. She set her purse down like she owned the room, then looked at Kris and beamed. "You going to try to sing this sober, honey?" she said loud enough for the entire crew to hear. The room burst into laughter. Warm, easy. The kind people give stars, not equals. Everyone laughed except Kris. He didn't respond. Just lit a cigarette with shaky hands and stared at her through the mirror like a man watching a house burn down. The same house he used to call home. Rehearsal started and Dolly took over like it was her show. Maybe it was. Before they even finished the first run-through, she stopped the band. "Let's take it down a notch," she said, twirling her finger in there. "Got to help out our fading Gligand here." More laughter, more of that tempty, echoing kind. Kris clenched his jaw and nodded. He didn't argue, didn't flinch. He just sang through gritted teeth, voice rough and hurt, while Dolly danced around him with her voice like a glittering ghost. Easy, floating, perfect. That night, on camera, she sang circles around him. Every line from her landed clean and bright, like polished silver. Every line from him sounded like it had been dragged down a gravel road. After the credits rolled and the crew clapped out of habit, she leaned in, still glowing under the studio lights, and whispered, "Well, that wasn't too painful, was it?" He didn't answer, didn't smile, just walked off stage, lit on a Thor cigarette, a Tia, and left her standing there in the smoke and applause. And never worked with her again, never turned a call. Never said her name unless someone forced it out of him. Years later, some young reporter, wide-eyed, hopeful, clueless, asked him what he thought of her songwriting. Kris took a long drag from a cigarette, wasn't supposed to be smoking. Breathed out slowly and said flatly, "It's cute." Like a Barbie with a broken heart. The reporter blinked, unsure if he'd just heard praise or an insult disguised as one. And when asked, smiling, hopeful, if he'd ever considered doing a duet with her. Again Christed him down and said, "Not unless thee bury me first." Then, after a long pause, added, "And maybe not even then." He didn't smile when he said it. I never did. Bob Dylan, the great fake. They met in '69. Two songwriters both still burning through the early pages of their legends. Bob was already halfway to sainthood, Ameth in motion. The kind of man who could mumble a half-rhyme and send a generation searching for meaning in theist. He was the voice of the voiceless, or so they said, part prophet, part host, all mystery. Kris was newer, rougher, less mystery, more mess. A soldier turned janitor turned poet, dragging behind him a bunch of broken truths and unwashed love songs. His words didn't whisper in riddles. They stood there bruised and bleeding, daring you to look away. When Bob invited Kris to his cabin in Woodstock, it felt like a passing of some invisible torch. Dylan said he wanted to trade words like it was some sacred money. Kris made that drive thinking it was respect, maybe even friendship. They stayed up all night, just the two of them, sitting cross-legged near a wood stove thathist like it had secrets of its own. The air was thick with smoke, coffee breath, and the kind of tension that only builds when two men try to see which one carries the heavier soul. Kris sang from the gut. No tricks, just pain, war, regret, women he missed, mistakes he didn't. Every verse came out raw, like it had just crawled up from the bottom of a bottle. Bob Mosley listened, nodded sometimes, smiled. That strange Dylan smile, the one that could mean admiration or looking down on you or nothing at all. He tapped his foot like a man keeping time. And when he did play, it was vague, half-formed like he was writing while trying not to mean it. Kris didn't push. He wasn't there to judge. He was there to connect, or so he thought. The next morning, Dylan repeated one of Kris's verses back to him, word for word. Kris smiled, thinking it was a compliment. 2 weeks later, Dylan played a new song live. It wasn't threesome, not exactly. The melody waist-twisted. The chords rearranged, but the heart. The wound at the center wasn't mistakable. Kris heard his own pain wrapped in Dylan's riddles. Same scar, different mask. No credit, no nod, no mention. Just silence and applause. Kris Hard's bootleg first, then saw the setlist, then read the reviews. Dylan Rotters to form. A song only Bob could write, he told a friend later, voice row. With too many unspoken things, he does and steal. He picks through the scraps, picks the bones clean, and sings like he dug the grave himself. For years, he let it slide. Let the myth grow taller. Let the crowds kneel at the altar. He knew how the game worked. His crowd never Caradwo lit the match. Just who stood in new smoke. But time has a way of pulling Theshin off everything. At a Grammy after-party in '94, they crossed paths again. The room was full of suits and sequins and bad wine. Bob saw him across floor, walked over slow, smiling like history was a handshake away, from being rewritten. He held out a hand. Kris looked at it, then at the man behind it. He smiled, but it was theckened that carried too many winters. "Webbeth no," he said, voice like gravel soaked in regret. "You ain't who you pretend to be." And he didn't shake the hand. Just turned and walked away like Amen, who'd stopped believing in ghosts and finally knew which ones had been haunting him all along. Kenny Rogers, the vending machine cowboy. Kris believed in the road. Dust, failure, blood, redemption. The kind of molest that left marks on your skin and songs in your bones. He wrote with calluses, not polish. Every lyric a wound trying to heal over. Kenny believed in Vegas, in spotlight, smiles, and fake teeth. In showbiz polish and featherhead hair, in choruses you could hum without ever thinking about what they meant. You were heartbreak like a rhinestone. Just another glittering accessory. In 1981, the two were booked for a songwriter's roundtable in L.A. An industry stunt dressed it up as art. A few legends, a few rising stars, a few empty chairs to make it feel raw. Kris didn't want to do it, but he owed someone a favor and figured maybe, just maybe, something on us might happen. Kenny arrived 20 minutes late, trailing cologne and ego. He wore sunglasses indoors. Of course, because its lights were always too bright. Foremen who spent their lives pretending to glow. T sat down, smiled like a game show host, and leaned toward the microphone. "Let's keep it light. Fellas," he said, voice smooth as whipped cream. "No one wants to hear about dying tonight." Laughter rippled through the room, nervous, polite. Kris didn't laugh, didn't smile. He looked Kenny right in the face and said, flat as gravel, "Then the hell are we singing?" Fizzlance, afterward. Was thick enough taught you. They played the round. Kenny crooned a breezy love song about leaving Simeon gently. Kris followed it with a ballad about a man losing his brother, Tor, and himself to a bottle. They didn't speak again until backstage. Kenny, still trying to be everyone's favorite, clapped him on the back and chuckled. "Easy, Captain Drama," he said. "Lighten up, huh?" Kris didn't say a word. He walked to the corner of the room, picked up a gold recorded, both been asked to sign for Summer Court Executive's wall, looked at it for a moment, then snapped it clean across his knee and dumped the pieces in the trash. Didn't wait for a reaction, didn't look back. To this day, when people ask Kris about Kenny, about the big hits, the crossover success, that friendly image, he just shrugs. The only quote he's ever given. He sang about our break like he was ordering off a menu. Polite, efficient, competent. And then, usually, he lights a cigarette and changes the subject. Leonard Cohen. The Iceman. They weren't enemies, but they sure ashel weren't friends. Kris and Leonard run in the same circles for a while. Songwriters with pens like scalpels. Poets hiding in plain sight behind wit hires. But where Kris bled on the page, Leonard sculpted with ice. Every word he wrote felt carved in stone, elegant, controlled, distant. One winter night in Toronto, Leonard invited Kristo a private poetry reading. Just a handful of book types, musicians, a few loyal followers in heavy coats and knowing glances. Kris showed up late, still shaking the cold off his shoulder's hand. The whiskey from his nerves. I didn't really do poetry readings, not quiet ones. Not the ones with candles and wine glasses and applause that sounded like secrets. But he came out of respect, curiosity, maybe hope, halfway through. Leonard stepped up to his microphone, his voice low and careful like prayer wrapped in velvet. He read a piece called The Drunk Who Forgot to Die. It was a haunting thing, lean, sad, and sharp, every word like a needle under the skin. And then, as he closed the final stanza, he looked out across the room and said softly, "Dedicated tough other men who can't let go." A few people chuckled quietly. Most clapped. Some looked over at Kris, who sat perfectly still, jaw set, eyes sun-readable. Afterward, Leonard found Himby the back exit, already lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "It was a compliment," Leonard said, voice smooth bit distant. "You'll understand it when you're sober." Kris didn't answer. Just took a drag, turned, and walked out into Toronto night. Didn't say goodbye, didn't say a word. They never spoke again. Years later, someone asked Kris in an interview about Cohen, about the mystique, the genius, the monk-like purity. Kris nodded once, slowly. "Leonard was cold," he said. "Beautiful, but cold, like a church that locked its doors." The interviewer laughed, thinking it was clever wordplay. But Kris didn't laugh. He just stared ahead as if were still standing outside that church, still waiting for someone to open the door. There was no feud, no headlines, just a quiet distance that never closed. Two men who wrote about pain from opposite ends of the room. One leading, the other watching, one redrowning, the other describing the color off the water. And that was the difference. That was everything. Johnny Cash, the shadow I couldn't outrun. It hurt to say it, but he said it. Johnny Cash had taken Kris under his wing when no one else would, gave him a shot when the doors were still slammed shut. Sang his songs, vouched for him in smoky offices, called him brother in public, and poured him caffeine private. Kris owed him his start. But somewhere along the way, that brotherhood turned into something else, something heavier. Johnny never let Kris out of the shadow. Not entirely. He held him close, but close like a pocket knife. Useful, quiet, small. In private, he praised the writing, sure, but there was always a warning curled in the compliment. Too soft, he'd say, flipping. Through Kris's lyrics like Asserman, he didn't plan to preach. You need more thunder in you. People want to feel the boots in the dirt. Kris wouldn't pretend to agree, but the words stuck like splinters. When they tore prisons together, it was worse. Johnny walked in.